Hey guys, um, welcome to the beginning of the sixth grade Heritage Studies / Ancient Civ class that I teach at VCA in Lakeland, Florida. My name is Elijah Goodrich. You can call me Coach Goodrich or Coach Goody. And we'll get to know each other more in class throughout the year. This is part one of our first unit, which is about creation, and then part two is about Mesopotamia. We'll do part one. Typically, I like to space these out with maybe a mini quiz or some sort of review in the middle. It is crucial that you have your Unit 1 notes ready, because you'll be using this information in this video lecture to fill in this information as we're going. You can find my YouTube channel by typing in Elijah Goodrich, also by looking on the syllabus, and there's plenty of other postings about it elsewhere. But this is where you'll be doing all of your note-taking this year, and pretty much for as long as you have me as a teacher. So this is for Part 1, Unit 1, and let's go ahead and get started. The essential questions. We do these at the beginning of every unit. These are typically your short answer questions for the unit tests. At the end of each unit, these are the things that you need to make sure that you have written down so that when we transition back into or the things that you're able to answer, so that and things that we can analyze throughout the unit as we're going. So go ahead and pause the video and write these down. Number one, what three things were brought into the world by Adam and Eve's disobedience, and how does that affect us today? And number two, what are the major differences between Mesopotamian religious belief and biblical truths? Go ahead and pause the video, write those down, and we will continue. Ancient history. For most Christians, the Bible is not only full of lessons, but it's also the most accurate historical book ever created. The first books of the Bible were written by Moses about 3,500 years ago. The first people, Adam and Eve, appeared anywhere from 6 to 12,000 years ago, depending on if you're an old earth theologian or a new earth theologian, but pretty much around that area, according to most biblical scholars. The three major ways to study the past: artifacts, tradition, and written records. Artifacts are physical man-made objects preserved through time, like ruins and ancient cities that have been left behind. Number two, tradition, the passing of information from generation to generation. Typically this is done through oral tradition or oral history. And then number three, written records, primary sources, historical documents from the day. Written records are very, very important, but they're also quite rare depending on the civilization. As we talk about the different ancient civilizations throughout this year, whether it be the Romans or the Greeks or the Japanese, the more that we know about a civilization, the more they likely wrote things down. The ones that we don't know so much about, like Mesoamerican civilizations or African ancient civilizations, because we don't have a whole lot of written records to keep track of everything. Oh no. There you go. So different examples. So artifacts, written records, and then oral tradition. All right, in the beginning, Genesis 1:1. We all know this one. God created the heavens and the earth and ... everything else in them. Day 1, day and night. Day 2, sky and sea. Day 3, land, vegetation. Day 4, stars, sun, and moon. Day 5, sea creatures, including fish and then birds. Day 6, animals, and then man. And then day 7, the Sabbath, Shabbat. He rested. We do not know 100% where the Garden of Eden, where all of this started, but we do know from the biblical records that it was in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Tigris has a T for top, so it's on the top. Euphrates has a U in it for under, so it's underneath. Tigris, Euphrates. So somewhere in this region is where the Garden of Eden started, where human civilization started. This area is part of what is known as the Fertile Crescent, areas in otherwise very dry locations where you're going to be able to grow a lot of food and be able to sustain a lot of life, which is very, very important for ancient civilization. So you got the ancient Mesopotamian or Sumerian civilizations in the Middle East, and of course ancient Egypt, which is probably one of, if not the most famous of all ancient civilizations. All right, the fall. What three things were brought into the world by Adam and Eve's disobedience? How do those still affect us today? Hopefully that looks familiar, because that is one of our essential questions. So make sure you're filling this in as you're going on in your own notes. Number one, sin. There's two types. There's living or being in sin, which is separation from God. That started with original sin. Original sin is the doctrine because Adam and Eve disobeyed God and they were humans. Since we are humans, we're also born with the same natural inclination. And then there are sins and sinning, which are wrongful actions that break God's laws. These are things like lying, murder, theft, those kind of things. Number 2, suffering. 3 basic types: physical, which is pain of the body, illness, etc. Mental, pain of the mind or psychological issues, anxieties, depression, to name a few. And then emotional, pain of the heart and soul, death of a loved one, divorce, separation, etc. And then you have 2 types of death of the third category: physical death, which is actually dying. Your heart stops beating and you turn cold and die. And then there's the worst one, spiritual death, which is internal separation from God. So those are all the things that are going to be brought into the world. Pretty heavy list, but it's important. So Adam and Eve being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. This leaves us into what is known as the patriarch stage, what I call the old men of the Bible. So Adam and Eve, after leaving, had 3 sons: Cain, Abel, and then later on Seth. So Cain, the eldest son of Adam and Eve, became jealous and murdered his brother Abel and fled into the wilderness, spreading his sinful ways with him. Seth, the youngest son of Adam and Eve, soon followed his older brother's evil ways, but he is traditionally seen as the best, or better than, at least better than Cain, not as good as Abel, but better, more holy and righteous. He is going to have the line of important people like Noah and Abraham that are going to come directly from him. Noah eventually comes along, raises a righteous family, and saved humanity in the ark. Noah had 3 sons who each spread out to inhabit a different part of the world. Really, we have 7 generations from Seth, or from Adam, all the way to Noah. So, scary picture in the top right corner of Cain and Abel, and then another one with Cain and Abel. Brief timeline of the beginning of the world. The ark. Now this is taken close to the top of Mount Ararat, which is in Turkey. Aerial photos, but if you look, you can kind of see the outline of a very, very, very long, some sort of object. Well, wood samples, or what had been decaying wood at that point in time, petrified wood, had pointed back to this time period, and this is probably the final resting place of Noah's Ark. And then you got the 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Here we go. So, after the Ark lands, where are they going to go? Ham, traditionally, is going to Africa, and his descendants would be the Egyptians and all the Africans down here. Shem is going to stay in the Middle East, Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. Well, Japheth is going to head north and east. He's going to head north to Europe and then out to Eastern Asia. He's going to head to Asia and north to Eastern Europe. The rise of nations. I would go ahead and, either on your Bible app or a Bible sometime, go ahead and read the story of the Tower of Babel. To Genesis 11:4 is where it starts. The Tower of Babel was originally designed to be a structure that reached out to the heavens, kind of showed their, God's, God wasn't that big a deal, that we as humans could be God, so we wanted to be control, that we could be some sort of deified or glorified being. God, seeing this, changed their languages, that's why it's called Babel, and that forced each of them to group up with a language that was like the one they spoke or close to it, and then spread out across the earth, following behind Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So think about it. What is humanity's greatest problem? Why do we sin, and what do we hope to gain from it? And I'll answer this at the end of today's video. So 5 parts of civilization. This is more basic history stuff. Kind of helps us to organize the things we're talking about. So for a modern civilization, even the ancient times, you needed 5 things. Number 1, organized cities and governments to manage laws, people, and resources. Number 2, social classes, divided groups into the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor. the ruling class and the working class traditionally. Number 3, job specialization. We don't need farmers all the way like people did way before this, farming just to grow what we call subsistence level food for just to take care of themselves and their families. No. Now, better farming techniques and better technologies lead to surpluses, which means having more than you need of food. People began finding other ways to make money by focusing on a specific skill, whether that's making farming equipment or being a blacksmith or being a carpenter. That way you could trade out that work for money or for food. Number 4, art, sciences, written language needed to advance society into more modern times and helps to develop culture. And then number 5, religion. People need something to believe in. They need to have a higher purpose. Number 1, what is humanity's main problem? Number 2, who are Adam and Eve's 3 sons? Number 3, Noah's sons, where do they settle? Number 5, what are the 5, or number 4, what are the 5 parts of civilization? And number 5, what 2 rivers surround Mesopotamia? I'll answer question number 1 for you, and you should be doing this on your own in your note packets. Humanity's main problem. We want to be like God. We want to have control. Total control. We want to make sure that we manipulate everybody else in our own little lives so that everything works out perfectly the way that we want it. We want to be like God. That's what Adam and Eve wanted when they were in the Garden of Eden. Satan tempted as the serpent tempted Eve and saying, no, you won't die if you eat this, but you'll become like God and you'll know good from evil and you'll be able to choose that. And that made Eve very curious. That made Adam very curious about, the possibilities are endless. I can be like God. I don't have to rely on somebody else to set up my own morality or the things that I think are right or wrong. And same thing with the Tower of Babel. Same thing that goes on every day. We want ultimate control, that security and control, when really it's not ours to have. So that's question number 1. Good job, guys. Thanks for following along, and part 2 will be up soon.